Ernesto. A few years back, I was basically a ghost, not in a cool, spooky way, more in a might get blown away by a strong gust of wind kind of way. Skinny, zero confidence, posture of a question mark. My daily routine was work, go home, play video games, sleep, repeat. I wasn't unhappy exactly. I just wasn't anything. I was just existing, running on autopilot. My social life was a couple of online friends I'd never met in person. One day, I saw a picture of myself from a family thing and it hit me. I looked pale, tired, and just weak. A background character in my own life. That was the spark. Decided I needed a change, a real one. Signed up for a gym membership, not one of those fancy fitness clubs with smoothie bars and yoga classes. Just a simple, no-frills place. The kind of place where the air smells like chalk and iron. The first few weeks were hell. Everything hurt. I felt stupid, weak, completely out of place. All these huge guys were moving weights that looked like they belonged on a forklift, and I was struggling to bench the empty bar. Felt like everyone was watching me, judging me. But they weren't. Nobody cared. They were all in their own zone, focused on their own battle. Slowly I got into a rhythm, found a simple beginner's program online and stuck to it religiously. 6 a.m. alarm, protein shake, gym, work, home, eat, sleep. It became my ritual, my therapy. The physical changes came slowly at first. A little more definition in my shoulders. My t-shirt started to fit a bit better. But the mental change was immediate. For the first time in my life, I had discipline. I was actively working towards a goal, the feeling of finishing a brutal workout, completely exhausted but knowing you gave it your all. It's a kind of peace you can't buy. After a few months, I wasn't the new guy anymore. I started to understand the unspoken language of the gym, the quiet nod of respect to the guy deadlifting a small car. The "you got one more in you" encouragement from a random stranger, asking for a spot and then giving a spot in return. It wasn't a social club. We barely talked about our lives outside those walls, but it was a community, a brotherhood forged in shared effort. We were all there for the same reason, to be better than we were yesterday. A year went by, then 2. I was a different person. I'd gained a solid 30 pounds of muscle. My posture was straight. I looked people in the eye when I talked. The gym had become my sanctuary, my constant. No matter how bad a day at work was, I knew I could go there and hammer it out on the weights. It taught me that pain can be productive, and that consistency is the only thing that brings real results. This newfound confidence started bleeding into other areas of my life. I was more assertive at work. I started going out more. And that's how I met Cassidy. It was at a coffee shop. I was just reading a book, and she sat down at the table next to mine. We made eye contact, a small smile, and that was it. We started talking. She was smart, funny, passionate about her beliefs. And beautiful, obviously. I was nervous, but I didn't let it show. I was calm. The gym gave me that. It taught me how to be comfortable under pressure. We hit it off immediately. I got her number. Our first few dates were amazing. She was fascinated by my discipline. She loved that I was driven. I remember one time, she traced the lines of my shoulder and forearm, told me she loved how strong I looked, how secure she felt when she was with me. When I told her about my transformation, how I used to be this skinny, shy kid, she was incredibly impressed. It felt good. It felt like all that hard work was being seen, appreciated. For the first 6 months, everything was perfect. The gym was my thing, and she had her things. We had our life together. It was a good balance. I'd go to the gym in the morning, and we'd have the evenings to ourselves. She never showed any interest in going with me, which was fine. It was my space, my time to decompress. The first crack appeared subtly. We were scrolling through my phone one afternoon, and I showed her a picture of me with a couple of guys from the gym. We'd just hit a new personal record on squats, and we were all grinning like idiots, covered in sweat. She looked at the photo for a second too long. Her smile was a little tight. "You all kind of look the same," she said. I laughed it off. "Yeah, we all look exhausted." But she didn't laugh. "No, I mean, it's just a very specific type, isn't it? All about being big and strong." I didn't know what to say to that. It felt like a weird criticism, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I just shrugged and changed the subject. A week or so later, she brought it up again. I came home from the gym feeling great, and she was sitting on the couch with her laptop. She didn't look up when I came in. I asked what was wrong. She sighed. I was just reading this article about the culture in places like your gym. I knew where this was going. It's such a breeding ground for toxic masculinity, she said, finally looking at me. All that aggression, the competition, the focus on brute strength, it's so primitive. I tried to explain. Told her it wasn't about aggression, it was about discipline. It wasn't about competition with others, but with yourself. I told her about the camaraderie, the mutual support. She just shook her head, like I was a child who didn't understand. You don't see it because you're in it, Ernesto. You're marinating in it every day. It changes how you think. That conversation planted a seed of doubt, not in myself, but in us. It felt like she was attacking a core part of who I was, the part I had worked the hardest to build. After that, the comments became more frequent. She'd call my protein powder steroid juice as a joke. If I was sore after a heavy leg day, she'd say, "Maybe your body is trying to tell you to stop torturing it with that patriarchal nonsense." It was death by 1,000 cuts. Every little jab was designed to make me feel foolish for my passion. Then she started trying to pull me away from my routine. "Could you miss the gym just this once? My friends are having a get-together. There's a really interesting documentary on tonight. We should watch it together instead of you going out." At first, I tried to compromise. I'd move my workouts around, go in later, or on different days. But it was never enough. Every time I chose the gym, it was seen as a personal slight against her. It became a loyalty test, her or the iron. The arguments started getting worse. I'd come home, and the atmosphere would be thick with tension. She would tell me that my obsession was unhealthy, that I was neglecting our relationship for the sake of my ego. I tried to make her understand that the gym is what made me a better partner. It gave me energy, confidence, a positive outlet for stress. Without it, I'd still be that ghost I was before we met. The person she fell for was built in that gym. That was the irony she refused to see. She saw my strength, but despised the place where I forged it. One evening, we had the biggest fight yet. It started over something small. I was getting my gym bag ready for the next morning. She saw it and just exploded. It wasn't a normal angry outburst. It was a cold, calculated lecture. She told me that she couldn't, in good conscience, be with a man who so enthusiastically participated in a problematic subculture, that it was against her principles. She said the gym represented everything she was fighting against, an outdated model of manhood based on physical dominance. I was just standing there, gym bag in hand, feeling like I was on trial. I was being accused of something, but I wasn't sure what. Being strong, being disciplined, having male friends, it felt insane. I told her as calmly as I could that she was twisting something positive into something ugly because it didn't fit her worldview, that she was the one being rigid and judgmental. That's when she laid it out, the ultimatum. "I need you to choose, Ernesto," she said, her voice completely flat. "It's either that place or it's me." I was stunned into silence. I couldn't believe it had come to this. A choice between the person I loved and the process that made me the person she supposedly loved. I looked at her, searching for some sign of compromise, some hint that she didn't really mean it. There was nothing, just a hard, determined stare. She had drawn her line in the sand. I spent that whole night awake, turning it over and over in my mind. Part of me was furious. How dare she? How could she be so controlling, so blind? But another part of me was terrified of losing her. I loved her. I really did. I couldn't imagine my life without her. Our good times were so good. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was obsessed. Maybe I could find another way to stay in shape. We could go hiking, maybe take up running together. I started to rationalize her position. I told myself that relationships are about sacrifice. You give up parts of yourself for the greater good of the couple. My friends from the gym, they were great, but they weren't my life. Cassidy was. By morning, I had made my decision. I was exhausted, defeated. I found her in the kitchen, sipping coffee like it was just another day. I told her she was right, that she was more important, that I would quit. A slow smile spread across her face, a smile of victory. It didn't look like the smile of someone whose partner had just made a huge sacrifice for them. It looked like the smile of someone who had won an argument. That should have been my final warning sign, but I ignored it. I was too busy mourning a part of myself I had just agreed to kill. Later that day, I went to the gym, not to work out, but to cancel my membership. It felt like a walk of shame. The guy at the front desk knew me. He asked if I was moving. I just mumbled something about being too busy and slid the cancellation form across the counter. I saw a few of my gym buddies. They waved. I just gave a weak wave back and hurried out before they could talk to me. I felt like a traitor. Driving home, I threw my gym bag in the back of my closet. I felt hollow. That night, Cassidy was ecstatic. She cooked my favorite meal. She was more affectionate than she'd been in months. She kept saying how proud she was of me, how I had made the mature choice. She told me this was a new beginning for us. We could find new hobbies, things we could do together. For a week or two, it felt like she was right. The tension in our apartment was gone. We were getting along. We started going for long walks in the evening. It was nice, but it wasn't the same. It didn't give me that same release, that feeling of pushing my limits. My body, so used to the 6 a.m. routine, felt confused. I'd wake up early, full of energy, with nowhere to put it. I started sleeping in later. The first month passed. The walks became less frequent. It started getting colder, and Cassidy didn't like being out in the chill. She suggested we try some home workout videos. We did it twice. She complained the whole time, and it felt more like a chore than a workout. So we just stopped. Our evenings became standardized. Come home from work, decide what to order for dinner, sit on the couch and watch TV until we went to bed. The discipline I had built over years began to erode. Without the anchor of my morning gym session, my whole day felt adrift. I started eating more junk food. Why not? I wasn't training for anything. The physical changes started subtly. The sharpness of my muscles began to soften. A thin layer of fat started to accumulate around my midsection. I told myself it was fine. It was normal. This is what happens when you're in a comfortable relationship. But I didn't feel comfortable. I felt dull. The energy that Cassidy had supposedly loved so much was fading. I was more tired, more irritable. I didn't have that physical outlet for my stress and frustration anymore. It all just stayed inside me, simmering. Cassidy didn't seem to notice at first, or if she did, she didn't say anything. She had gotten what she wanted. I was home more. I was completely hers. The toxic influence of the gym was gone, but something else was gone too. The man she had been attracted to was slowly disappearing, and neither of us seemed to realize it until it was too late. My friends from the gym had texted a few times at the beginning, asking where I'd been. I made up excuses. Work was crazy. I was traveling. Eventually, they stopped asking. I was completely cut off from that world, from that part of myself. It was just me and her, in our quiet apartment, watching the glow of the television screen. I remember looking in the mirror one morning after about 3 or 4 months. I didn't recognize the guy looking back at me. His shoulders were slumped. His face was puffy. The fire in his eyes was gone. He just looked deflated. And for the first time, a cold, hard knot of resentment started to form in my stomach. I had done this for her, for us. But in the process, I was losing myself. I tried to bring it up with her once. I told her I was feeling sluggish and unhappy. I suggested maybe I could go back to the gym just a couple of times a week. Her face immediately hardened. "We've been over this, Ernesto. Are you saying you're not happy with me?" She twisted my words, making it about her, making me the bad guy. It was emotional blackmail, plain and simple. So I dropped it. I buried the resentment and tried to pretend everything was okay. But the foundation of our relationship had a crack in it, and that crack was getting bigger every single day. It was building up to something. I could feel it in my gut. The final conversation was coming, and I was terrified of it, so I dropped it. I stuffed the feeling down and went back to the couch. The months that followed were a long, slow, downward spiral. It wasn't a sudden crash, more like a leaky faucet. A constant drip, drip, drip of my former self draining away. My body continued to change. I had spent years building a physique I was proud of. Strong, functional, healthy. Now, I was watching it deconstruct in slow motion. The discipline of the gym had controlled my diet. Now, without that goal, the floodgates were open. Pizza on a Tuesday? Sure. Ice cream before bed. Why not? Cassidy encouraged it at first. She called it living a little and not being so rigid. But then my clothes started to get tight. First it was my jeans. Then my shirt started to pull across the stomach. I remember one morning trying to button up a shirt I used to love. The buttons were straining. I felt a flash of shame. I took it off and grabbed a looser one from the back of the closet. My wardrobe started to consist of sweatpants and oversized hoodies. My comfortable clothes. Cassidy's attitude started to shift in tandem with my physical decline. The affectionate praise for my mature choice had long since vanished. It was replaced by a new kind of language, little passive-aggressive jabs. I'd be breathing a bit heavy after bringing in the groceries, and she'd say, "Wow, take it easy there." I'd reach for a second slice of pizza and get a pointed look from across the table. "Are you sure you need that?" It was confusing. She was the one who celebrated when I gave up my rigid lifestyle. Now she was policing the results of that decision. Our sex life, which had been healthy and active, withered and died. It started with her being too tired or having a headache. Classic excuses. Then it moved on to her just rolling over and facing the wall the moment we got into bed. The distance between us in that bed felt like a mile. Any attempts I made to initiate intimacy were met with a sigh or a gentle push away. It was a quiet, soul-crushing rejection, repeated night after night. I stopped trying. The fear of that rejection was worse than the lack of intimacy itself. I was no longer the strong, confident man she'd felt secure with. I was just the guy who lived in her apartment. The irony was suffocating. She had systematically dismantled the very qualities she claimed to have fallen for. She hated the toxic gym, but it turned out she was addicted to its byproducts: confidence, discipline, physical strength. Without the source, the byproducts faded, and so did her attraction. The worst part was her growing contempt. It was in her tone of voice, a constant low-level annoyance. The way she'd ask me to do something, like take out the trash, sounded less like a request and more like a command to a lazy subordinate. She stopped looking at me when I talked. She'd just stare at her phone or the TV, giving one-word answers. Our conversations, which used to be lively and engaging, were now purely logistical. "Did you pay the electric bill? We're out of milk." My mom called. There was no warmth, no connection. I felt like a roommate, a freeloader. My apathy grew worse. What was the point of trying? I had no energy, no motivation. I'd come home from work, and the sheer effort of thinking about what to do for the rest of the evening was exhausting. So I'd just collapse on the couch. The TV became my best friend. Endless hours of scrolling through streaming services, not really watching anything. Cassidy started spending more time out with her friends. I was never invited. She'd come home late, smelling of wine, full of energy from her social life. She'd see me on the couch, in the same spot she left me, and the look on her face was a mixture of pity and disgust. One night she came home, and I was still in my sweatpants from the day before. I hadn't even showered. I'd just worked from home and then migrated to the couch. She stood in the doorway and just stared at me. "Look at you," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Don't you have any self-respect left?" I didn't say anything. What was there to say? She was right. But a voice in the back of my head screamed, "You did this to me. This is what you wanted." I said nothing. I just took the verbal punch and continued staring at the screen. The man she was yelling at was a stranger to me, too. The Ernesto who woke up at 6 a.m. to go lift heavy things would have never let himself get like this. That Ernesto had standards. He had pride. This new version of me had nothing. I had traded my armor for her approval, and in return, she had left me defenseless and then stabbed me for being weak. Her complaints became more direct. "Why don't you ever want to do anything? We never go out." I'd suggest something, like going for a walk, and she'd find a reason not to. "It's too cold," or "I'm not in the mood." The real reason was that she was embarrassed to be seen with me. I had become an accessory that no longer matched her outfit. The final nail in the coffin came on a completely ordinary weeknight. It had been about 8 or 9 months since I'd quit the gym. We were on the couch, in our usual positions, miles apart. She was scrolling through her phone, that endless hypnotic thumb flick. I was half watching some bland reality show. Silence had become our default setting. Suddenly she stopped scrolling. She angled the phone screen slightly away from me, but I could still see the reflection in her eyes. It was a video of some fitness influencer, a guy with perfect abs doing some ridiculous workout on a beach. She let out a soft, involuntary sigh. It was a sound of longing, of desire. It was a sound I hadn't heard from her in a very, very long time. She must have forgotten I was there, or just didn't care anymore. Without looking up from the phone, she said it, the words that would change everything. God, I wish you still looked like that. Remember when you had drive? You've just gotten so soft. Time stopped. The stupid voices from the TV faded away. The hum of the refrigerator, the sound of traffic outside, it all went silent. The only thing I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart. Soft. It wasn't an angry word. It wasn't a yell. It was worse. It was a final, dismissive judgment. A verdict. She had taken my strength, my discipline, my fire. She had demanded I extinguish it. And now she was holding me in contempt for being the ashes that remained. Everything became crystal clear in that moment. It wasn't about me being toxic. It was never about her principles. It was about control. She wanted the benefits of my hard work without allowing me the process it took to achieve them. She wanted a lion, but one she could keep in a cage in the living room. And when the lion stopped being a lion, she lost interest. I didn't get angry. I didn't yell. A strange, cold calm washed over me. The resentment that had been simmering for months didn't boil over. It solidified into a block of pure, hard ice in my gut. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was still staring at the phone, lost in a fantasy of a man who wasn't me, the man I used to be. I realized in that second that I didn't love her anymore. I don't know when it happened. It had been a slow death, but her words were the official time of death announcement. The person I had loved wouldn't have done that. Wouldn't have been so casually cruel. Or maybe she would have. Maybe I was just too blind to see it. Quietly, I stood up from the couch. The movement was so sudden it startled her. She finally looked up from her phone, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "What are you doing?" she asked. I didn't answer. I walked down the hall to our bedroom and went straight to the closet. In the back, under a pile of old blankets, was my gym bag. It was covered in a thin layer of dust. I pulled it out. The sound of the zipper opening was shockingly loud in the quiet apartment. Inside, everything was as I had left it. My lifting shoes, my worn-out gloves, my water bottle. It felt like unearthing a time capsule, a relic from a past life. Cassidy appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. Her arms were crossed. The look of annoyance had been replaced by confusion with an undercurrent of dawning suspicion. "Ernesto, what's going on? What are you doing with that?" I finished zipping up the bag and slung the strap over my shoulder. The familiar weight felt good. It felt right. I turned to face her. I looked her directly in the eye, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't intimidated. I wasn't afraid. I felt nothing but a cold, liberating clarity. "I'm going to the gym," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't waver. It was the voice of a man who had just made a decision he would not be talked out of. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions. Confusion, then anger, then a flash of panic. "What? No. We talked about this. You promised," she said, her voice rising. "You can't just decide to go back to that toxic place." I took a step towards the door, and she stood in my way. I stopped a few feet from her. "You were right," I said, and her face softened for a second, thinking she was winning. "The man you fell for spent 2 hours a day in that toxic place. It made him strong. It made him confident. It gave him drive." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. "I gave that up for you," I continued, my voice still perfectly calm. "And you've spent the last 6 months showing me nothing but contempt for the result. You hate the man I became to please you." Her mouth opened, then closed. She had no argument. She knew it was the truth. "I'm not making that mistake again," I said. "I'm choosing myself this time." I moved to walk past her. She reached out and grabbed my arm, a desperate, panicked gesture. "Don't do this, Ernesto. We can fix this. I didn't mean it." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. "Yes, you did," I said. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, and to the front door of the apartment. I could hear her following me, her pleas turning into sobs. "Please don't go. We can talk about it." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I didn't turn around. There's nothing left to talk about. And with that, I opened the door, stepped out into the hallway, and closed it quietly behind me. The click of the latch echoed, a final, definitive sound. the end of one chapter, and the beginning of a new one. I stood in the hallway for a moment, the closed door behind me. I could hear her muffled sobs on the other side. A part of me, a small, weak part, felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overwhelmed by a massive, surging wave of relief. It felt like I had been holding my breath for 9 months, and I could finally exhale. The weight wasn't just in the gym bag on my shoulder. A much heavier one had just been lifted from my soul. I walked down the stairs and out into the cool night air. I didn't have a plan, I just started driving. My old gym closed at 11 p.m. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was 9:30. I knew where I was going. The drive was on autopilot. My mind was surprisingly quiet. No frantic thoughts, no second guessing. Just a calm, resolute certainty. I had made the right decision. When I pulled into the gym's parking lot, it felt surreal. It looked exactly the same faded sign, the same cars I vaguely recognized. It felt like coming home after a long, pointless journey. I walked in. The familiar smell hit me first, that mix of rubber, chalk, and sweat. It was the smell of effort. The same guy was at the front desk. He looked up, his eyes widened a little in recognition. "Hey man, long time no see," he said with a nod. "Thought you'd moved away." "Something like that," I said. "Need to sign up again." He just smiled, slid the forms across the counter, and in 5 minutes, I was a member again. It was that easy. The thing I had agonized over, the thing that had cost me my identity, was undone with a simple signature. I walked into the weight room, the familiar clang of iron plates, the low grunts of exertion, the background beat of some generic rock music. It was a symphony. I saw a few of the old faces. They were older, bigger, stronger. They hadn't stopped. One of them, a guy I used to spot for on bench press, caught my eye. He gave me a simple nod. That was it. No questions, no, "Where have you been?" No judgment. Just a simple acknowledgement. Welcome back. That quiet, understated acceptance meant more to me than any heartfelt speech ever could. This was the toxic brotherhood Cassidy had been so afraid of. I found an empty bench and dropped my bag. I looked at myself in the giant mirror that lined the wall. The guy staring back was a mess. Puffy face, slumped shoulders, a noticeable gut under my t-shirt. I looked weak, soft. The word echoed in my head. Soft. A fire ignited in my chest. A cold, determined rage. Not rage at Cassidy. Rage at myself for letting it get this far. That night, I didn't try to be a hero. I knew I had lost everything. My strength, my stamina. My ego wanted to load up the bar with the weights I used to lift. My brain knew better. I started with just the bar. It felt heavier than I remembered. My form was sloppy. My joints ached. It was humbling. It was humiliating. But it was also a beginning. I did a full basic workout. Light weights, focusing on form. Every rep was a reclamation. Every set was a statement. By the end, I was drenched in sweat. My muscles were shaking, and I was completely, utterly spent. It was the best I had felt in almost a year. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time afterwards, just feeling the pleasant ache in my muscles. My phone had been buzzing in my pocket. I pulled it out. 20 missed calls from Cassidy, a dozen long, rambling text messages. First they were angry, then pleading, then apologetic. I read none of them. I just blocked her number. Then I went into my contacts and blocked her on every social media platform. A clean break. I drove to a cheap motel for the night. The next day I arranged to go back to the apartment to get my things. I sent her a single text from a friend's phone, telling her the time I would be there and that I wanted her to not be present. When I arrived, the apartment was empty. She had left a long, tear-stained letter on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, folded it without reading it, and put it in my pocket. I packed my clothes, my books, my few personal belongings. The whole time, I was moving on autopilot. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing. The apartment was no longer my home. It was just a place filled with bad memories. As I was about to leave, I saw the letter on the counter where I'd put it. I picked it up, walked back into the kitchen, and dropped it in the trash can. I didn't need her explanation. I didn't need her apology. Her actions over the last 9 months were the only statement that mattered. I stayed with a friend for a few weeks until I found my own place. A small, simple apartment, just enough space for me. And my new life began. The routine came back instantly. 6 a.m. alarm, gym, work, home, cook a healthy meal, read, sleep. My life became monastic in its simplicity, and I loved it. The gym was my forge. Every day I went in and hammered away at the soft, weak version of myself. It was a slow, grueling process. There were days I was so sore I could barely walk. There were days I felt weak and discouraged, looking at the pathetic numbers on the bar. But I never missed a session. I was rebuilding myself, one rep at a time. The physical changes came faster this time. Muscle memory is a real thing. After a month, the puffiness in my face was gone. After 2 months, my old shirt started to fit again. After 4 months, I was hitting numbers close to my old personal records. But the real transformation was internal. The fire in my eyes was back. The confidence returned, but it was different this time. Before, it was a younger, more naive confidence. This was quieter, harder. It had been tested and reforged in the fire of a colossal mistake. I reconnected with the guys from the gym. We never once talked about Cassidy or my absence. We talked about lifting programs, injuries, and nutrition. Our friendship existed within the context of shared self-improvement, and it was solid and uncomplicated. I learned a hard lesson. Never, ever sacrifice a core part of your identity for someone else's approval. If they ask you to diminish yourself so they can feel comfortable, they don't love you. They want to own you. A relationship should be two complete, strong individuals choosing to walk together, not one person breaking the other down into a manageable size. About 6 months after the split, it happened. I was in the gym, in the middle of a heavy set of deadlifts. I was in the zone, focused. I finished the set, breathing hard, and as I stood up, I saw her. Cassidy. She was standing near the yoga mats, pretending to stretch, but her eyes were locked on me. She looked the same, but my perception of her had changed completely. I no longer saw the beautiful, passionate woman I had fallen for. I saw a person who had tried to break me for her own selfish reasons. Our eyes met across the gym. She gave me a small, hopeful smile, a hesitant wave. For a split second, I felt a flicker of the old emotional connection. Then it was gone, replaced by a profound and peaceful indifference. I didn't scowl. I didn't ignore her. That would have required energy. That would have meant she still mattered. I just gave her a polite, neutral nod. The kind of nod you give a stranger who holds the door for you. And then I turned my back. I turned back to the bar, back to my workout, back to my life. I didn't look to see her reaction. I didn't care. Her chapter was over. The book was closed. I added another plate to each side of the bar. It was time for my next set. My final set was my best one yet. As the weight left the floor, I felt strong. I felt free. I was myself again, and I would never ever give that up for anyone again.